Hey everybody, this is Dr. Mann. I wanted to do a quick demonstration of how I carve my amalgam for you. So I have here a already prepped 29DO. Someone did a really nice job. One of the students prepped this probably for a practical at some point, but they have nice open contacts. Their box has a really nice shape. It has that convex axial wall and everything's really nice and conservative. So this is a good example of what we're looking for on this upcoming practical. So I'm just going to place this Tofflemire band over it. I already had it assembled. I'll tighten that up. I have a little pink plastic wedge here I'm going to put in there to tighten that up. And I've already triturated a spill of amalgam here. So I'm going to get this going. The first thing that you're going to do is just get the amalgam in there. And I'm going to focus on the box. And I'm going to pick up a good bit of amalgam here in my amalgam carrier. And I'm really just going to force all of it down into that box area like that. So I'm going to pick up my smallest condenser, and I'm going to spend some time pressing this. You hear my squeaky condensing sounds. Pressing this down into those corners and nooks and crannies on my box area. I'm going to come back here on the lingual, and my goal is to really take this kind of awkward mass of amalgam and make it into one cohesive piece. I'm starting to kind of overflow onto my pulpal floor, so I'm going to go ahead and come in here. You can see this, ooh, it barely fits this tiny little amalgam condenser into this very conservative isthmus that this student prepared. You really can't have an isthmus that's smaller than your smallest condenser nib for this reason, because I need to get in there and press down with some pretty good force all across there. I'm making little circles as I do this, and I want my little circles to overlap as I slowly move all across that box area and then into this pulpal floor up into the dovetail. So just spending a little bit of time. Really want to come in here on this box and condense up against this wall. The biggest problem with under condensing is that you are left with a really brittle amalgam, and the last place that you want a brittle amalgam is in your box, because that's supporting your marginal ridge. You really don't want your marginal ridge to be brittle and break off. So for my next layer here, I'm going to pick up another bit of amalgam with my amalgam carrier. I'm working quickly, but I'm also taking some time to really condense it well and build a good foundation. So again, I'm trying to get this kind of awkward pebbly mass to behave and get down where I need it to go. I'm focusing on my box first because that's kind of the biggest area. Overlapping all my circles. It's going to be really easy to overfill this, oops, sorry about that, this isthmus and dovetail area because they are tiny. So I'm going to just spend a little bit of time pushing it down in there. I'm not quite getting rid of excess yet. I'm really focusing on getting everything to kind of come down into this area and meld those particles with my first insertion of amalgam. So you can see I switched nibs because I was having a hard time getting that to behave. But I need to use a little bit more force as I do this. And I want it to go from being that loose, useless amalgam to becoming a part of this mass that's all connected. Spend a little bit more time down here overfilling. But I'm going to overfill one more time. And I should probably hurry so that I can still pick it up. I'm going to do another one real quick. Don't be afraid to change plans when you realize that your material is not behaving the way that you want it to behave, because you're relying on that material to accomplish something pretty important, have the qualities that you want that material to have to behave in a certain way. So don't use something that's not going to work for you. So just for the sake of overfilling, I'm going to do one last little insertion there. And I'm going to come back. Kind of want to hear that squeaky condensation sound to know I did it again. Trying to stay on this camera is a little bit easier said than done when you're really focused on a tiny spot. So I'm going to go ahead and switch to my next condenser. Listening for that squeaky sound and really trying to, you almost want it to be flat across these ridges. I know and in the end we want beautiful anatomy, but to get the strength up against those cavo surface margins, you really need to spend some time doing this above the level that you're going to carve down to. So it might seem kind of messy and it might seem kind of time consuming, like why add all that extra if you're not even going to use it? But it really has more to do with getting these amalgam particles to have the characteristic of having strength and not being brittle, and really amalgamating them together into a single mass. And you can't really do that if you don't spend time really condensing things. So out here at the edges, it's really important, especially for your marginal ridge. And you can see how high that is compared to the marginal ridge of my molar. So I'm going to have to drop my marginal ridge considerably, and that's expected. That's a skill you will have to be good at and have a plan of attack for that. And the real trick is that you know where to stop. And that is always going to be the height of the neighboring marginal ridge. You can do a little bit of that manipulation before the band is off, but you're going to also have to spend some time manipulating that after the band is removed, and I'll show you how I do that. So you can see how this is really flattened out. I'm not going to be able to get into those really small areas with this giant condenser, but I am going to spend a little time here, especially on this marginal ridge, really making it strong. And I'm sure some of you are going, you're taking too long, it's not going to be carvable. But it will be. And I know I'm doing this bench top and that kind of seems like cheating, but I can't really figure out how to film that in a way that is easily done. So we're going to do it this way. So now that I have everything kind of overfilled, I'm gonna go ahead and move on to my pre-carved burnish. So I have this little acorn burnisher, and what I'm gonna do is a couple of things. I am gonna remove some of this excess very, very lightly. This is not a heavy movement. I'm really just gonna kind of draw in with my knowledge of dental anatomy and the tooth itself guiding me. Just kind of draw in kind of where I want that triangular fossa to be to make the width of my marginal ridge. And then again, just something in the central groove area so I kind of have my bearings. I can get rid of a little bit of excess. The other thing that I want to do is I want to take my Explorer and I'm going to remove some excess along my marginal ridge. I don't want to do this straight up and down because I risk making that occlusal embrasure too deep. So I'm going to come in at an angle and just really gently carve it down with my Explorer. Hear that carving sound? It's a good sound. You're still able to carve and remove some of your excess amalgam, but you can see how that really rounds out the occlusal embrasure already. It brings it down just a little bit. It's still probably too high, but I'm going to be more comfortable taking a band off when this is a little bit lower than if I left it as high as it was. It would be a lot more likely to break on me. So after I've done those couple of things, what I'm going to do now is move to my carver. So here I have my cleoid discoid, and I like to use the discoid part, this rounded end, more in the dovetail area, mainly because there's so many walls there. It's making this big rounded change, and if I try to stick a point down in there like right from the start, I just worry that it's gonna over carve somewhere, and since this isn't pointed, I can have a little more assurance that it won't do that. So what I'm doing is I'm just dragging this across, and it's resting on my margins, and it's not going to overcarve. If you want to feel even safer about that, you can use the larger one. But when I do, I'm not really removing a lot of amalgam. So once I've kind of gone through that process, I'll switch back to this small one, and I like to use the cleoid section, and I leave the point in the very center. It has to remain where you want your central groove to be, and I'm going to rest the flat part of that cleoid on my tooth structure, and I'm going to very gently and purposefully rest on the tooth. I'm not pushing down into the amalgam. I'm resting on the tooth, and I want more and more of this little carver to rest on that tooth structure, because the tooth will tell it where to go. It'll tell it when to go up, and it will tell it when to come down. And when you get into these tight little areas where like this triangular fossa is going to be, it will fall down into that place too. So I'm going to come at it from the lingual this time, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to let it sit down in my central groove, and I'm very gently going to rest it up against the tooth structure and let it follow that. Now you have to be careful in these really narrow isthmi, because it's too easy to overcarve on the other side. So you may need to come up straight up and down to create that little central groove, but then when it gets to be a bigger area, I'll lay it flat down again. And you want to do this on your marginal ridge too. Just make sure it's resting on tooth structure, and keep that point of your cleoid down in that central area. You can even do it this way and decide how wide you want your marginal ridge to be, and kind of carve up and down this way. It'll start to really deepen that little triangular fossa area. So this takes some time. It takes some patience. It's still carvable. And even once I take this band off, it's still going to be carvable. Shake off some of that excess. But you can see that it's starting to define. You have to define the marginal ridge from both the outside, from the occlusal embrasure, but also from the inside. So where this triangular fossa is will define how this rounds out and falls down into this fossa. I'm just going to spend a little bit of time deepening it, but as long as I'm resting that edge of my cleoid on the cavo-surface margin there, I'm okay. Now you may get to a point where you're kind of like, okay, this band is really just in my way more than anything else. You may decide that things are strong enough and set enough that you can take it off. I'm going to take one more look at the height of my marginal ridge before I do that. And I can see it's still got a little bit of a wall here, and it's even kind of hanging over onto my molar. So I'm going to come sweep across this. And this is where you might get a little creative, and you have to kind of learn in your head, what of my tools will do the thing that I want to accomplish? And in this situation, maybe something like this carver can sweep through here with a little more force than your Explorer and kind of open it up so it's not leaning quite so much over that 30. And then I also like to think of my marginal ridge in two phases. So if you hold it at a 45-degree angle here, you can kind of bring it down in height from the top. But you got to do it from the facial. Oops, sorry guys. And then you got to do it from the lingual. And as you do this, you'll probably go, oh man, I just erased my beautiful triangular fossa. And that's one reason why you just have to kind of be patient and keep going back to different areas that you've already worked on, and that's okay. If you find that something is now less defined than it was before, as you make changes, just go back and carve again, and that's going to be fine. You really have time to do this. Don't overdo it, but most of the time when a student calls me over, they think it's already too set, and I can really probably get in there and still carve a bit. So at this point, I'm going to get the band off because I want to take a better look at this marginal ridge. So I took out my wedge. I'm going to hold my finger over the tooth, and I'm going to release this very outside screw because I just want this to come off, the whole shebang. And remember that the screw out here is what's holding the whole band on there anyway. And then what I'll do is I'll slide out the opposite end so that all I have now is a band in between my adjacent tooth and my marginal ridge. And then what you can do is you can take a really large condenser to kind of act as a counterweight, and then very carefully, I kind of do it from both sides, wiggle this out. Is this a little more complicated on a patient? Sure. But you really kind of have to take the same care and have the same patience, and it's going to be okay. So you can see here that it's still overlapping over to 30. I did kind of break off a little nib here, but I'm okay. My heart can start beating again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my occlusal embrasure, and to do this I'm going to use my cleoid straight up and down, and I'm just going to carve this away until I have a nice open occlusal embrasure. I'm being a little bit aggressive with this because I do have a bit of amalgam that needs to go, and it's starting to set a little bit more on me. And then now that I have a little bit better access, I'm going to be even more aggressive and resting up here on my cavo-surface margin on the facial wall of my box and keeping my tip kind of centralized I'm going to drop this thing because I need it to be the same height. And then I'm going to do it from the lingual. Keep that tip. You can line it up with this groove coming right out of the molar. But I got to keep my cleoid rested on my lingual cavo surface margin of the box too, so that I don't overcarve it. All right, so that's looking better as far as the height of my box. I'm going to round out from the occlusal portion here again. And I'm going to focus again on this little triangular fossa, because otherwise I won't have a really nice defined marginal ridge. Just going to come in here, keep it rested on that tooth surface and deepen this part of the isthmus that's coming into that fossa. It is setting on me. You can hear that little carving noise a little bit louder as an indicator, and it's kind of starting to burnish a little bit with that shine as I carve. But like I said, it's still carvable. And at this point, all you're really doing is perfecting things. Now I do want to take a look at my proximal area. Looks like I had a nice job with my wedge there. I don't see an overhang, but if I did, I could get this amalgam carver in there and I would rest it on the tooth structure below, this is hard to see, below my restoration, and then very gently scrape up. And then you can do the same on the facial. You'll rest it on the tooth structure below your restoration and then just kind of gently drag it up. You can see how nicely this is angled so that when you are in a mouth, you can kind of get in there and do what you got to do. I'm going to spend a little time looking at my embrasures. Looks like my lingual embrasure needs to be opened up just a smidge. You could also use that little Hollenback. I lost it. Oh, here it is. You can do the same thing with this and kind of get up in there. Open up the occlusal a little bit more. All of this will make your restoration more cleansable. It will make it easier to floss. If it's hard for you to floss, it's really going to be hard for your patient to floss. I think that's looking pretty good. So, you know, at this point, I think I would get a cotton pellet and just kind of brush this up. If I wanted to accentuate this ridge here, coming up in this little lingual groove, you can use something like this to do that very carefully, just to give it a little bit more anatomy. Don't want to scratch it up a whole lot, and I don't have a cotton pellet with me, so I can't really brush it away. But then, you know, at this point, you always want to come back and check your margins. I've got a lot of shadows in here, so it might look a little bit overcarved, but I don't really think it is. Nothing's really catching. I've got that nice little groove right there. You want to come down in here and check that you really don't have an overhang, and do the same thing on the facial. Some of these things that look so easy to do while I'm on benchtop, as you get better at working in the mouth, you will be able to do all these things. But remember too that your first practicals, you will have some time out of the stem head, and you can use that time to perfect these things and really check your margins and come back in and carve some areas that you think need to be carved a little bit better, add some better anatomy. You really should have time to do all that before it sets up on you. So just a little overview of the process, the steps that I use to carve, how I rely on resting my carver on to structure to guide me to create my anatomy. I'm going to post a really nice video that Dr. Stevenson did of carving some amalgam on a complex amalgam restoration, just because he talks about some of these same things and he does it the same way that I do, but he's really good and his videos are nice. So I'll post that for you to watch too. If you have any questions about how I do this, just let me know. Thanks.